Imagine a man sitting alone at his kitchen table late at night, staring at a pile of unpaid bills, his head buried in his hands, wondering if life will ever give him a break. This is where our story begins. Before we dive in, let me remind you, if you believe in stories that touch the heart and celebrate resilience, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness right now so you never miss an inspiring journey like this one. Now, meet Daniel, a man who never imagined he would be raising his little daughter, Emily, on his own. Just a year ago, life looked so different. There was laughter in the house, warm dinners at the table, and the comfort of two parents sharing the load. But fate has its own ways of testing us. After a tragic accident claimed the life of his wife, Daniel was left to pick up the shattered pieces of his world, holding on to nothing but the tiny hand of his 4-year-old daughter. He didn't know how to cook more than instant noodles, he had no idea how to braid Emily's hair, and his job at the local hardware store barely paid enough to keep food on the table, let alone cover rent, utilities, and daycare. His nights were sleepless, not because of noise, but because of the heavy silence that reminded him of everything he had lost. He'd wake up each morning to Emily's innocent smile, and though her hugs gave him strength, he knew she deserved so much more than the broken man he had become. The days blurred into each other, rushing to work, hurrying to pick Emily up, scraping together dinner, and collapsing into bed just to do it all over again. Friends slowly drifted away, some didn't know what to say, others didn't know how to help. Daniel found himself drowning in loneliness, hiding his tears so Emily wouldn't see. But even in the middle of all this pain, there was one thing that refused to die inside him, the love he had for his daughter. It became his anchor, the fire that kept him moving forward, no matter how heavy the weight. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that he was failing her. One evening, after another grueling day, Daniel came home to find Emily sitting at the table with her crayons, scribbling something on paper. When he asked what she was drawing, she looked up with her big brown eyes and said softly, "It's us, Daddy. You and me. Don't worry, we're going to be okay." That tiny voice pierced through his despair like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that giving up was not an option. He had to find a way, no matter what, to turn their life around. And so, with trembling hands and a heart still healing, Daniel made a promise to himself and to Emily, that he would fight, learn, and grow until he could give her the life she deserved. He didn't know how yet, but he knew why. And sometimes, that's the spark that begins a whole new journey. The days that followed Daniel's promise to himself were anything but easy. In fact, life seemed determined to push him even harder, as if testing whether his resolve was real or just a fleeting moment of hope. He woke before dawn, dragging his tired body to prepare Emily's lunch, dressing her in clothes that never quite matched because he hadn't yet figured out what little girls like to wear, and rushing her to daycare before heading to the hardware store. There, he worked long hours stacking boxes, helping customers, and smiling through exhaustion because he couldn't afford to lose the one steady income he had. But even with his endless effort, the numbers never added up. The rent was overdue, the fridge was nearly empty, and every bill that arrived in the mailbox felt like another nail in the coffin of his hopes. On the nights he worked late shifts, he would pick Emily up with a heavy heart, knowing she had waited far too long for him. One night she looked at him with sleepy eyes and asked, "Daddy, why are you always so tired? Don't you like playing with me anymore?" Those innocent words shattered him more than any overdue bill ever could. He realized that while he was fighting for survival, Emily was quietly longing for the father she once knew, the one who laughed, played, and tucked her in with silly bedtime stories. It was then Daniel understood that success wasn't just about paying bills, it was about being present for his daughter. But how could he balance it all? How could one man carry the weight of two lives? Every weekend, Daniel tried to make up for the lost time by taking Emily to the park or reading her favorite storybook, though sometimes he would doze off mid-sentence, his body unable to keep up with his determination. There were moments he wanted to break down completely. He would lock himself in the bathroom for a few minutes, pressing his forehead against the cool tile wall, fighting back tears so Emily wouldn't see the cracks in his armor. And yet, no matter how exhausted or broken he felt, one thought echoed in his mind: "She needs me." That thought became his shield, his reason to stand up every time life tried to knock him down. But the pressure didn't stop at home. At work, his boss began noticing his fatigue, his slower pace, and his distracted mind. Whispers of, "maybe he can't handle it," floated around the store. Fear of losing his job consumed him. One evening, Daniel sat staring at his pay stub, realizing that even with all his effort, it wasn't enough. He couldn't keep living on the edge of collapse. Something had to change. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel sat down at his kitchen table with a notebook and pen. For the first time, instead of drowning in despair, he started writing out ideas, what skills he had, what opportunities might exist, and what small steps he could take to build a better future. It wasn't a miracle solution, but it was the first moment he took control rather than letting life control him. He knew this road wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that if he kept waiting for life to magically get better, Emily would grow up watching her father stuck in struggle. He refused to let that happen. And so, Chapter 2 of Daniel's life closed not with answers, but with a decision, the decision to fight harder, to search for opportunities beyond his current world, and to believe that even in the darkest of times, there was a path forward. Because sometimes, the greatest success stories don't start with triumph, they start with a man on his knees, choosing to rise again. Change often begins in the quietest of moments, and for Daniel, it started one rainy evening when he ducked into the public library with Emily. They were supposed to just wait out the storm, but while Emily played in the children's corner, Daniel wandered through the shelves, his tired eyes landing on a book about starting small businesses with limited resources. Out of curiosity, he flipped through the pages, not realizing that this simple act was about to change the course of his life. The words spoke directly to his struggles, ordinary people who had turned hardships into opportunities by using skills they already had. Something inside him stirred. Could he do this too? He remembered how much he loved fixing things, how neighbors often came to him when their chairs wobbled, their locks jammed, or their shelves broke. Repair work had always come naturally to him, and suddenly, he wondered if this could be more than just a hobby. That night, after tucking Emily into bed, Daniel stayed up until dawn, scribbling notes, making lists, and sketching out the possibility of turning his skill into a side business. For the first time in months, he wasn't drowning in fear, he was swimming in possibility. The following weekend, Daniel decided to test his idea. He printed a few flyers that read, "Affordable home repairs, reliable work, local dad you can trust." He handed them out in his neighborhood and posted a few at the grocery store, the church bulletin board, and even the daycare center. At first, silence. A week passed with no calls. Doubt crept back in. Was this just another false hope? But then, one evening, his phone buzzed. A woman needed help fixing a leaky faucet. Nervous but determined, Daniel went over, did the repair, and left with not just a small payment but also a glowing smile from the customer. Word began to spread. Slowly, the calls trickled in, another faucet here, a broken shelf there, a door that needed fixing. The jobs were small, but each one built his confidence. He was no longer just a struggling employee at the hardware store, he was a man building something of his own, piece by piece. Emily noticed the change too. She would watch him pack his tools and beam with pride, telling everyone, "My daddy can fix anything." Her innocent faith in him became the fuel he needed on days when exhaustion tried to drag him down. Every time he saw her smile, he remembered why he had started this journey. Still, the road was far from smooth. There were days he returned home with scraped hands, aching muscles, and barely enough energy to read Emily her bedtime story. Some nights he questioned whether this side hustle would ever grow enough to truly lift them out of poverty. But unlike before, Daniel was no longer sitting in despair, he was moving forward, even if the steps were small. And with every new client, he was proving to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. One evening, as he sat with Emily at the park, watching her laugh on the swings, Daniel realized something profound. Success wasn't going to come all at once, in some grand miracle. It was already happening, hidden in the quiet victories of each day, the meals he could now afford, the smile on his daughter's face, the pride he felt when neighbors trusted him with their homes. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, growth, and the belief that he and Emily deserved a better life. And with that realization, Daniel knew he had crossed a threshold. The man who once sat at his kitchen table in despair was gone. In his place stood someone who believed, truly believed, that brighter days were ahead. This was the turning point, the moment when hope transformed into action, and action began to build a future. What began as a few small repair jobs slowly grew into something bigger than Daniel ever imagined. Within months, word of his reliability and kindness spread across the neighborhood. People didn't just hire him because he could fix things, They trusted him because he showed up on time, charged fairly, and treated every home like it was his own. Soon, he wasn't just the local handyman, he was becoming the go-to problem solver for families all around town. His weekends were fully booked, and eventually, he had to reduce his hours at the hardware store to keep up with the demand. For the first time since his wife's passing, Daniel could breathe a little easier. There was food in the fridge, Emily's clothes were new instead of secondhand, and the overdue bills that once haunted him were slowly disappearing one by one. But beyond the money, there was something far greater growing inside him: pride. Pride in the life he was building, pride in the father he was becoming, and pride in the example he was setting for his daughter. Emily noticed it too. She no longer asked why her dad was always tired. Instead, she boasted to her friends at school, "My daddy has his own business." That one sentence was enough to make Daniel's heart swell with joy. Every late night, every scraped hand, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it. His daughter could see him not as a broken man struggling to survive, but as a strong father who refused to give up. And that, to Daniel, was the greatest success of all. But life still had more lessons to teach him. With growth came new challenges: balancing multiple jobs, handling customer expectations, learning about invoices and taxes, and figuring out how to expand without losing the personal touch that had made him special. There were nights when the paperwork piled up, when exhaustion tempted him to quit, when fear whispered that it was all too much. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered the promise he made to Emily and to himself. He wasn't just building a business, he was building a future. Slowly, Daniel began to dream bigger. He created a small logo for his repair service, ordered business cards, and even started a simple social media page to share his work. To his surprise, the online world opened doors he never expected. Neighbors tagged him in posts, friends shared his page, and new customers began calling from areas he had never worked in before. Each message, each job, each word-of-mouth referral felt like confirmation that he was on the right path. Soon, he wasn't just fixing leaky faucets and broken chairs, he was renovating kitchens, repairing roofs, and taking on projects that truly showcased his skill. Every success built his confidence, and every setback taught him resilience. Daniel was no longer living day to day, he was laying the foundation for something lasting. Through it all, Emily remained his biggest cheerleader. On the nights when he worked late, she would draw pictures of him holding tools, writing, "Best Daddy in the World," across the page. He kept those drawings pinned above his desk as a reminder of why he worked so hard. And whenever exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he would glance at those crayon-colored reminders and push forward. Daniel's life was far from perfect, but compared to the man who once sat defeated at his kitchen table, he was unrecognizable. He had risen, not just in financial stability, but in spirit, in hope, and in purpose. What was once just survival had become growth. And as his small business continued to blossom, Daniel began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the life he once thought impossible was finally within reach. This was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a brighter chapter, one filled with possibility, hope, and the kind of success that comes not from luck, but from relentless love and determination. Years had passed since the night Daniel sat at his kitchen table drowning in unpaid bills and despair. The man who once questioned whether he could keep a roof over his daughter's head was now walking through the doors of his very own workshop, proudly displaying the sign that read, "Bright Fix Solutions, Repairs You Can Trust." The small side hustle that began with a few flyers and whispered referrals had blossomed into a thriving business. He now employed 3 workers, men who had also fallen on hard times and were grateful for the chance Daniel had given them. His calendar was filled with renovation projects, his phone rang with new opportunities, and his name had become synonymous with reliability and kindness. But more than the money, more than the growing reputation, what truly mattered was the life he had created for Emily. She was now a bright, confident young girl, her smile radiant and her laughter echoing through a home no longer shadowed by fear. She didn't just see her father as someone who worked hard, she saw him as her hero, a man who turned struggle into strength and pain into purpose. On the day of his workshop's grand opening, Daniel stood before a small crowd of family, neighbors, and customers who had supported him from the beginning. Emily clutched his hand tightly, her eyes shining with pride. As he looked around, Daniel felt tears well up, not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude. He thought back to the countless nights of doubt, the moments he wanted to give up, the weight of loneliness that nearly broke him. And yet, here he stood, proof that even in the darkest times, love can light the way. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't talk about profits or success. He simply said, "Everything I've built, everything you see here, is because of one reason, my daughter. She gave me the courage to fight when I had nothing left. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: no matter how hard life hits you, never stop fighting for the people you love. Because sometimes, the greatest success isn't measured in money, it's measured in the smiles you protect, the hope you carry, and the love that guides you through every storm." The crowd applauded, and Emily hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Daddy." At that moment, Daniel knew he had not only rebuilt his life, he had created a legacy of resilience and love that his daughter would carry forever. And now, dear viewer, as you sit with Daniel's journey in your heart, I want to leave you with this: if his story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of love, strength, and kindness, then don't just walk away, help us spread more of these stories. Please, like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness so together we can inspire countless others who may be standing at their own breaking point, waiting for hope to find them. Remember, every act of kindness, every story of resilience, creates a ripple that touches more lives than we can ever imagine. And just like Daniel, you too have the power to rise, to transform, and to succeed, not just for yourself, but for those you love.